I want to start with a number, not an oil price, not a barrel count, a different kind of number, 180. That is the number of girls killed when a school in the southern Iranian city of Minab was struck on the first day of Operation Epic Fury, February 28th, a Wednesday morning. Classes were in session. Most of the victims were children. UNESCO called it a grave violation of humanitarian law. The UN called for immediate accountability. And when the Commander-in-Chief of the United States was asked directly, as Commander-in-Chief, do you take responsibility? His answer was 4 words. I don't know. That is where this script begins, because that 4-word answer is not just a political failure, it is a signal. And the signal tells you exactly what kind of war this is, what rules it is being fought under, and what precedent it is setting for every conflict that comes after it. 14 days in. Let's account for all of it. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated series of strikes against Iran, targeting its nuclear program, ballistic missile infrastructure, and senior leadership. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening hours. The stated goal was surgical, controlled, limited. Records show hundreds of strikes in at least 26 of Iran's 31 provinces. Tehran was the most heavily targeted, alongside significant concentrations in central, western, and southern regions. That is not a surgical operation. That is a country being systematically struck from end to end. By March 3rd, 787 people had been killed inside Iran since the strikes began. 10 medical centers had been damaged. Iranian authorities shut down internet access entirely on February 28th, collapsing connectivity to approximately 1% of normal levels, cutting millions of civilians off from information about what was happening in their own country. UN human rights experts stated clearly, the targeting of civilians, educational facilities, and medical institutions constitutes a grave violation of international humanitarian law and human rights law, received the opening strike. Iran did not submit, and Iran did not stay clean either. In retaliation, Tehran launched an unprecedented barrage of missiles and drones at multiple Gulf states, hitting energy infrastructure, civilian airports, and luxury districts. For the first time in history, Iran attacked all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries simultaneously: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. UN experts confirmed that Iranian retaliatory strikes against civilian targets, including desalination infrastructure and residential towers in neighboring Gulf countries, also violate international humanitarian law. And then there is the cluster munition problem. By the 10th day of the war, Iran had fired 300 missiles at Israel. Nearly half carried cluster submunitions, weapons that spread dozens of explosive warheads over a radius of 6 miles. The Convention on Cluster Munitions bans this practice. More than 100 nations have signed it. Iran has not. Amnesty International called it a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, describing these as inherently indiscriminate weapons that must never be used. Both sides are now on record violating the laws of war, one with a school, one with cluster bombs over residential neighborhoods. This is what the erosion of humanitarian norms looks like in real time. These violations did not happen in a vacuum. They happened after the Secretary of Defense stood in front of cameras on March the 2nd and announced there would be, in his words, no stupid rules of engagement. And after the Commander-in-Chief stated publicly, I don't need international law. One human rights organization pointed directly at that framing. It said the entire Middle East has an urban density of 75 to 80%. An air war using heavy weapons, often guided by AI targeting systems, will disproportionately devastate civilians in an environment that dense. The rules of engagement exist precisely because of that reality. When you remove those rules before the bombs fall, the school in Minab is not a surprise. It is a consequence. Israel authorized a ground invasion of Lebanon on March 3rd, deploying forces along the northern border. The Lebanese government reported strikes reaching border villages, provoking Lebanese army redeployment and violating the 2024 ceasefire agreement. More than 820,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon. Families are sleeping on Beirut's streets. Tens of thousands of Syrians and Lebanese have fled across the border into Syria. The UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs told the Security Council directly, Lebanon's latest humanitarian crisis is just one more consequence of a regional war that is spiraling out of control. In Gaza, Israel closed multiple aid crossings. The UN condemned the suspension of humanitarian movements. The EU stated on March 10th that Israeli actions were unacceptable and urged immediate steps to protect Palestinian civilians. In Pakistan, the army was deployed to suppress pro-Iranian protests in the northern cities of Gilgit and Skardu. In Karachi, demonstrators attacked the U.S. consulate. The conflict has left the Middle East. It is now a regional war with global consequences and no exit strategy on the table from any side. A top Iranian foreign policy official said this week that the country sees no room for diplomacy. Iran can keep fighting. The IMF warned that every 10% increase in energy prices over the course of 2026 is expected to raise global inflation by nearly 0.5%. And the new Iranian Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, elected 9 days after his father was killed, has made his position clear. The strait stays closed. The attacks on U.S. bases continue. The war goes on. The 14-day scorecard is this: a girls' school destroyed, accountability absent, cluster munitions fired over residential neighborhoods, 10 medical centers damaged, 820,000 people displaced in Lebanon. Every Gulf state struck simultaneously for the first time in history. The laws of war publicly dismissed by the people ordering the strikes. And a UN Security Council resolution that condemned Iran's retaliation but said nothing about the strikes that started it. Legal scholars worldwide have concluded the U.S.-Israel strikes violate the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force, do not meet the criteria for self-defense, and lack Security Council authorization. The norms that hold war inside limits did not collapse overnight. They eroded statement by statement, strike by strike, press conference by press conference over 14 days. And what replaces them, if anything, is the question this war will be studied for long after the last missile lands. If this analysis reached you, subscribe to Zyveron and hit the bell. Drop a comment. What accountability, if any, do you think is possible here? I read every single one.